What book fucked you up mentally? A Comprehensive Guide to JavaScript Programming. Edit. Didn't expect my answer to blow up like this. Although I wanna say each and every programming language has its own use case. Just at switching from Java to React.js after years, I felt like a spider is crawling under my neck, that the language allows you to add properties to an object dynamically. JavaScript would fuck anyone up. Now assembly, that's where it's at. Decided to read The Shining, ended up getting snowed in with my family on our farm halfway through the book, and finished it before we could get out. In retrospect, I should have read it during the summer. I read this book when I was 16, and it was so scary that when I saw the movie afterwards, I thought it was a parody. I know the movie is a classic, but to me, it's just so tame compared to Stephen King's writing. I was in bed with an extremely awful case of flu with a side of strep, fever up to 102, so my husband went out to the store and brought back some books and magazines for me. The first book I picked up was The Stand. I was not prepared for that shit at all. Where the Red Fern Grows, being forced to read that sent grade school me through a rollercoaster of emotions. Edit. I really appreciate all the upvotes and people sharing their stories' experiences with this book. I figure I'll share mine. I was a bookworm between 5th and 6th grade and was really enjoying the book, so I decided to read ahead and finish the book. Needless to say, 11-year-old me crawled in bed, cried like a baby. Then after the whole class finished the book, we went on to watch the movie in class. It resulted in a room full of kids sobbing. I can only assume this is why I have more sympathy towards animals than I do people. This book definitely left an impact on many of us. Haha, oh man, I read this book in 6th grade and I was enjoying it so much but had no idea how the ending would turn out. So we had some kind of class party going on. It might have been the last day before winter break or something, I don't remember. Anyway, soda and treats for everyone, music, just a nice kickback non-educational afternoon in the classroom because our teacher Mr. Fox was cool like that. So I'm sitting in the back finishing this fantastic book, sipping on a root beer. And then I get to that fucking ending. What happened next is my own fault. I should have figured out shit was gonna get heavy, put the book down, and finish it at home. But it's just so amazingly written that I couldn't. So instead I'm slouching deep in my chair, covering my face with the book, blinking through stinging tears, finishing it. Suddenly Mr. Fox calls me out. Hey, how's that root beer? Hey Joan Wickersbeard, you enjoying that root beer? Hey. Hey Joan Wickersbeard. Hey, what's going on? By this point I can feel everyone staring at me. I'm terrified to put the book down, but it's too awkward, so I let it happen. Book goes down. I've got ugly snot and tears everywhere. The pretty, mean, popular girl says, "Are you crying?" Some other kid laughs. I'm just staring at Mr. Fox like, bro, WTF, help me out. He stares at me, confused as fuck, glances down, sees the title, and the on his face goes from confusion to oh. Fuck. He walked me out of class. Took me to the nurse's office while I sobbed. My friend told me that he threatened the class that the next person who laughed at me would be assigned a book report on that book and would have to present it out loud. He was a pretty rad teacher. I was reading it in 7th grade on my own. I remember waiting for class to start. I see a word I didn't know and pull out my pocket dictionary. As you can tell, I had many friends in 7th grade. Look up the word. Entrails. Read definition. Put away dictionary. Put away book. Stare off into space until class starts. And then there were none. Fantastically plotted, some great characterization, a truly awful sense of dread, the best mystery novel ever for a reason. Yeah, this was really unexpected. Agatha Christie has some awesome twists, but that one took a direction unusual for her. I'd say more, but spoilers. That book made me take a library card to town library, or what the hell it is actually called. The library lady in my school library just picked me and my friends from the hallway and asked if we want to loan that book. I was like, meh, okay, because she was so nice and could not decline. After that I read every single Agatha Christie from school library, and there were just couple of them, so I had to go to big library to get the rest. I fucking loved that library lady. She made me read books. Edit. Just little more words about the library lady. She also got pupils excited about chess. At one point everybody was crazy about chess. Even the cool kids that used to think that it's only for nerds. Try The Murder of Roger Ackroyd if you haven't read it. I have no mouth, and I must scream gave me nightmares. Did you know this spawned a really messed up game? Extra sanity points lost. I've said it in another comment in our books, and I will say it here too. It is amazing just how much perversion, horror and tragedy can fit into a 15-page short story. Scary stories to read in the dark. Dude, the pictures are what fucked me up the most. Although I do attribute those books for making me the horror lover I am today. I'm incredibly excited for the movie. I went back and read some of the stories recently, and while I can see them being kinda scary to a kid, they were really boring to an adult. However, the pictures still scared the pee out of me at 30 years old. Night Shift by Stephen King, a collection of short horror stories. I was around 10 when I started really getting into reading, and my dad had a lot of Stephen King on the shelf, so I naturally started reading his stuff. I remember many nights staying up far too late after reading, just waiting to hear "So Nice" come from my closet. Some of those stories genuinely fucked up my young mind. I think Stephen King excels at short stories. His novels are good, but he is a short story savant. He just is so good at tying things up in small doses. Not a book but a short story. The Lottery. My 7th grade class read this and recreated it by picking a kid and pelting them with crumpled up paper. This was a Catholic school FFS. True. The Ones Who Walk Away from Amelas is another one that'll fuck with you. Night by Elie Wiesel. There is nothing more unsettling than reading the inner thoughts of a Holocaust survivor. Edit. Thank you guys for sharing your personal experiences and stories. I've read practically all of them and even attempted to comment on as many of them as I could. You're some truly amazing people. The audiobook is harrowing. Wiesel reads it and at points you can hear that he's close to weeping. The sheer horror of his experience bleeds through even more, and you will not be left with dry eyes by the end. There's a good reason he didn't speak, in general, for 20 years following the camps. Yerk. Edit. This was my highest upvoted comment. And it's my cake day. In the words of Ice Cube, today was a good day. Thank you, Reddit. D. When I was in middle school they had the entire school Reddit, and Elie Wiesel actually came as a guest speaker. Listening to him speak had a massive impact on me, as well as many other students. After he spoke he allowed people to ask questions, and while I have forgotten most of them by now, there was one that left the 1,500 or so people in attendance so silent that you could hear a pin drop. A student asked him if he ever lost faith in God, to which he replied that he did, and that he never did regain faith in God. I was maybe 13 at the time and almost a decade has passed, and I still think about that answer nearly every day. The part of this book that got me the most was his description of the number of prisoners in the train cars. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like in the beginning they would fit 80 people to a train car, and towards the end they could fit 125 or some crazy amount more. Then when he describes how a son beats his father to death of a scrap of bread really fucked me up. American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. Much more horrifying than the movie. I scrolled down looking for this. The detail used for some of the killings had me all sorts of fucked up. Flowers for Algernon, the first book I had a big emotional reaction to. Spoiler. I didn't realize he dies at the end succumbing to adverse effects of experiment until I read online the way his pen trails off on the last word was the indicator. I wish I didn't read that. I was happier believing he was going to be taken care of at a rehab for life. That book was depressing AF. Bridge to Terabithia. I also had a very visceral reaction to Tuck Everlasting. I read all this shit about tech bros trying to crack the code to extend human life indefinitely and I'm like, why? Catherine Patterson writes beautifully, but dang, her books are rough. Liddy girl gets fired from a clothing factory for saving her friend from being molested by the foreman. The great Gilly Hopkins racist little girl in foster care of nightingales that weep girl avoids ceremonial suicide only to marry her stepfather. These messed me up. Tuck everlasting, I was not ready maturity-wise for that book when my English class read it. Maybe every other 12-year-old in my class was, but I wasn't. They were all discussing if immortality was worth it or not, and those folks trying to upload their brains to AI to survive the heat death of the universe, and meanwhile I was screaming and crying and cursing God in the counselor's office because I was just hit with the fact my mom was going to die one day. A child called it. I read that book when I was still a kid, and holy crap, it fucked me up. Afterwards, I remember doing tons of research about kids being abused by their parents and being horrified at how common it was. When the mom acts all nice just because the CPS worker was coming by and then just goes back to the abuse. How heartless can someone be? So, my stepmom read this book to us when we were young. IDKY, it's such a fucked up book. I think it might have been to make us appreciate how good we had it. Looking back now, it feels like some sort of manipulation tactic. IDK. The hot zone just made me paranoid I'd catch Ebola. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Fantastic book. I actually read it for the first time when I was in a psych hospital at age 17. Fortunately, it was very different than the book. Bad nurses can really cause a lot of damage, though. We need to talk about Kevin. It's the same plot as the movie, just written through letters from the wife to the husbands, and oh boy was that intense. I didn't know it was a book. The movie screwed me up for sure. I wish I never watched it. I'm sure the book would be way more interesting, though. The yellow wallpaper fucked me up for quite a while. I remember when I read that in high school, the copy that they gave me had really bad case of old book smell, and it really enhanced the story for me. Watership Down by Richard Adams. A bloody story about rabbits. Who knew? I read it in first grade because bunnies. I only remembered it being about bunnies finding a new home. Then I read Plague Dogs in high school, thought, this book is fucked up. Wait a minute. Am I remembering Watership Down correctly? And I read it again. I was not remembering it correctly. Young brains are good at filtering out bad shit. Lord of the Flies. This is really a disturbing look at humanity. It's all the more real if you've ever worked in early childhood development, because it is so feasible it's ridiculous. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Blew my young mind away and really made me think about how society is organized. That one made me think about how close our society is to becoming that way, even closer now than at the time the book was written. The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. It tells the story of American soldiers in Vietnam during the war, along with explaining what mental and physical things that each held. What screwed me up mentally was that you couldn't trust the author, you didn't know whether he was telling the truth or making the story up. Edit. Thank you for all the upvotes. And the awards. At least he warned you in the book about that. It by Stephen King. I read the first chapter when I was about 8 and literally spent the next 2 weeks shivering in my bed every night until I got up the courage to talk to Dad, who went and spoiled the ending to reassure me. I read this in Pet Sematary when I was about 9 or 10, and they both fucked me up for a long time. I naively thought they'd be like Goosebumps or Point Horror after I found them both at a car boot sale. Hopefully not the full ending. Go Ask Alice. I read it when I was 12. It was the first time I had read a book like this, and it shook me to my core at the end. I was obsessed with that book when I was a kid. Made me want to try drugs rather than scared me though. I still think about that line another day, another blowjob. Looking at it now as an adult, I realize this was just a bullshit story made up to scare kids. 1984. The great thing about this book is how cleverly it plants an idea in our readers' heads that somehow there will be an epic revolution someday, and the proles will be key. Then it just turns around and lets us know none of that is going to happen, because there are ways to subdue society, they have mastered those ways, and they won't even let them be martyrs in their own heads. That's how powerful governments can be, and in that it is really a horror novel. I also really like how it dismantles the trope of hero bravely enduring torture. When I first read Animal Farm in my early teens, I was at the age where I could recognize the parallels with real life, and it fucked me up for a long while. All animals are created equal. But some are more equal than others. I had to scroll way too far to find this. I read Animal Farm for the first time when I was really young, like 12, and honestly I didn't really get the references or where the story was going, but it wasn't bad and was quite short and easy to read, so I figured I'd finish it. That moment at the very end when the pigs got up on 2 feet and sat down at the table with the humans straight blew my damn mind. It caught me so off guard, it was really the first book I ever read where I just sat there afterward dumbfounded. Really a masterpiece of literature. The Giving Tree. That kid was so ungrateful, and the tree gave him everything it had. That book is a manual for codependence. The tree needed to set some damn boundaries and tell the kid to fuck off. House of Leaves was really unsettling. Came here to say this. I read the first half of this book over the course of a few months, but I read the last 300 pages in like 2 days. Or maybe none of that is true. My Algebra 1 textbook. Of Mice and Men. Tell me about the rabbits, George. Cat in the Hat. I was molested when I was 7, and I knew what happened, so whenever the cat said your mother won't mind, flashbacks back to when I was 7. This is perhaps the most heartbreaking of them all. Hey stranger, I'm really sorry that happened to you. I hope you're doing better now. Misery by Stephen King. That book slowly breaks you as you keep hoping that the protagonist survives the horrors he faces. I read Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar when I was in 7th grade for accelerated reader points, and I haven't been the same person since. I didn't read it until I was like 26, but it's so rare for me to find a book as deeply relatable as that one. She's a writer, she's depressed, she fears all of the choices in front of her, and the idea of losing the rest of them when she chooses one, so the only way out is to kill herself, and she learns so much about herself in the process of recovering from her depression. Man, Sylvia, I know you've been dead for 50 years, but you get me. Mark Twain's autobiography, where he said, "But who prays for Satan? Who in 18 centuries has had the common humanity to pray for the one sinner that needed it most?" It changed the way 14YOME saw theology forever. I wouldn't say fucked me up, but after reading The Curious Case of the Dog in the Nighttime, it really made me a more understanding and open-minded person. I would say fucked me up in the sense it permanently made me realize that mental illness or no, everyone's brain works differently, and people may have an underlying trauma or reason why they do the things they do. I had the exact opposite experience. Me. Reads The Curious Case of the Dog in the Nighttime for sophomore English class summer reading. Wow. The narrator is so relatable. He thinks just like I do. This has never happened before. I'm going to enjoy talking about this in class. First day of English class, we get ready to talk about summer reading. Teacher. So as you all might have guessed, the narrator isn't normal. Classmate. Yeah, he was weird. And that's how I learned I had Asperger's. The Kite Runner. There's another book he wrote, too, called 8,000 Splendid Suns that was pretty soul-wrenching. The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I really think Unwind by Neil Shusterman is interesting. There is a chapter in which you are put into the perspectives of the minor antagonist as he slowly gets torn limb by limb and organ by doctors. All of his organs get taken out one by one, in non-descriptive detail, until there is nothing left of him. It didn't really fuck me up mentally, but I thought it was fucked up. Additional note. It even gets more fucked up when you remember that the person who is getting torn limb from limb, harvested for organs, is legally a child. The Giver. The Book Thief. The Lovely Bones and Lolita, both books I had to read for a course. I'll never reread them, truly disturbing. The Plague from A. Camus. Camus's writing is incredible. It's not beautiful, but it impacts you. I came into this thread to say The Stranger. 4 sharp knocks at the door of unhappiness. Flowers in the Attic. I remember in middle school all of these girls carrying V.C. Andrews books with them. None of those girls had parents who would let their kids watch movies with swear words in them, but they don't notice their daughters reading books that are straight up about incest. Fahrenheit 451. Haunted by Chuck Palahniuk. A Child Called It by Dave Peltzer. It's an autobiography about the child abuse Peltzer suffered through as a young child. He goes into detail about wounds the abuse. He has a few books about it. It's probably one of the worst cases of child abuse I've ever read about. Fucked me up reading it as a young kid. Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. Nothing I've read has ever struck me with more terror than the thought of slipping through the cracks in the larger cities in the world. I hate to set foot in London for this fear, which will definitely make tomorrow fun as I have to spend the entire day there. Johnny Got His Gun. Edit. Thank you very much strangers for the silver and platinum. Very undeserved, but I appreciate it greatly. This was the first book I ever read front to back, and it was shell-shocking. Sharp Objects. It was the inception of Minfix for me.